Welcome to another amazing episode of Now Behind the Brands, an Evolution Media podcast.
Decades later, now it's worth a lot more. The business is worth a lot more.
You go to work and you put blood, sweat and tears into doing what you do and building the business, building that reputation. That's the IP, that's the trademark. In my world, in legal terms, when you talk about branding, you talk about value, we're really talking about trademarks and trademark registrations, where people invest more in the building and the fleet of cars and everything else than they do in the stuff that actually they're investing sustainably in for the long term.
You might have the IP still, but it might not be a valuable piece of IP. Just because you've come up with an idea doesn't mean it's worth anything. Hi, and welcome to another amazing episode of Behind the Brands. And today we've got Ben Travers from Foot Anstey. Have I said that right?
Yeah, you have. Great.
Welcome, Ben.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Do a little clap, bit of energy. Thank you for joining. So we were just talking off air about the fact that you've not seen this before. So this will be a new experience for you.
Absolutely. Looking forward to it.
Yeah. So, I mean, probably best if rather than me butcher it, you introduce yourself a little bit about what you do and a little bit about what you've been doing in your career. I guess just roll with whatever you feel's relevant, I guess.
Yeah, okay. So I'm a lawyer and I'm an intellectual property lawyer. So I work at a firm called Foot Anstey, as you say, where I head up the intellectual property team. We're a national law firm with a national team supporting businesses, all different sizes, all different walks of life, all different sectors, on creating value through intangible assets. So that could be all sorts of different forms of intellectual property, but given what we're here today doing and talking about, it's most likely to be brand and trademarks and that sort of thing.
So I actually do know little bits, because we do a little bit of IP here and there across the businesses that we have, but I know for definite that with branding, it's really important, especially for us as an agency, that there is sometimes that discussion at the start with stuff that we create for people. And it's variably different depending on who you talk to, whether they're up on that or not.
Yeah.
So we get asked a question, do I get to keep everything? And I think we have a little term in our contract or a letter of engagement that sort of says it's your IP, effectively. Because there is instances, and you'll probably tell me more about this, of agencies not doing that and then basically coming back later and saying, well, actually, you need to pay us for use. Is this like a thing? I
100%. And it's, it's great that you're talking about it, because that's where some of the issues come from, that people don't talk about it. They're just naive to it. So there's no right or wrong answer. There's going to be some intellectual property in the work that an agency does. Where it sits is usually part of the commercial arrangement. But one of the things that is quite interesting about it is that the stuff that agencies do and the stuff that other organisations that are doing that create intangible assets have a real value, and they're really potentially moving the dial for the businesses they're working with. But often those businesses don't give it the same amount of time or thought or care as they would do a tangible asset, which you can imagine if you're having a conversation around buying something physical, the issues around who owns it and so on, it's probably taken for granted. It's not thoughtful.
Yeah, I think people spend more time thinking about a name than any of the other stuff, don't they?
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Well, there's been instances of logos being created and all sorts, right, where someone should have probably got paid more than they did, or maybe even where they've gifted them something later on. I think that was a story that happened. Was it Nike that did that? I can't remember.
It was one of those.
One of the big brands where they gave some shares away later on down the line for the design to kind of recompense them because of the fact that it would have been their IP maybe. I don't know what the commercials were, but maybe that's more of a generosity thing than anything. But understanding where you sit, if you create a brand from scratch, which we have done before in the past, where it's an idea and we're kind of coming up with logo designs, brand guidelines, their website, maybe even some of the sort of ethos behind the brand and all of that stuff. That's kind of tangible, right? Intangible, but is an intellectual property at the end of the day.
So I want to ask, when you have a startup like Nike would have been a startup when that logo and brand was created, that wasn't worth anything when it was created, but decades later, now it's worth a lot more. The business is worth a lot more. How's that value? How's that calculated? What does that look like?
And the calculation is really can be quite tricky because there's no directory, there's no sort of thing you can cross-reference and see. You know, brands are not sold necessarily multiple times, so there isn't necessarily in the same way as with a used car or a house or something where there's a market for it. They're all different. But in my world, in legal terms, when you talk about branding, you talk about value, we're really talking about trademarks and trademark registrations, and that's the way and that's another thing that often gets missed in the conversations. A brand is one thing, but in order to make it properly an asset and to have value attributed to it, then you look at going down the trademark registration route. And that's where you create a vehicle which traditionally people think of as a tool to litigate and deal with enforcement. But really in the day-to-day, it's more about creating value and whatever business you're in, every day you go to work and you put blood, sweat and tears into doing what you do and building the business, building that reputation.
Yeah.
To ring fence that's the IP, that's the trademarks, and that's where there's often this disconnect between those tangible assets where people invest more in the building and the fleet of cars and everything else than they do in the stuff that actually they're investing sustainably in for the long term.
Yeah, because I think that's where if you look at kind of patents, that's kind of common, isn't it? Where the patents add value to a business because they've got something that they've created. I think if you were to package something to sell, your branding and your logo and your design that you have and your name, probably high on the list of things that give it a value if it's a service-led business or even product-led business, right?
Yeah, I think so. And I think as consumers, we all make decisions, whether we're B2B or B2C purchasing, you're making a decision, and part of that is going to be the brand, part of that is going to be the reputation, word of mouth, and all of those sorts of things. And I haven't got any evidence for this, but I imagine if you went to lots of well-known brands and you said to them, you're going to lose your patents or whatever it might be, or you've got to take your name away from the shop door and nobody knows who you are anymore, and you've got to come up with a new one, I can imagine which most of them would probably rather,
Yeah, definitely. So what's the journey that someone would go on then if they were if they're listening to this or watching this and they were thinking, well, actually I started it and it was a startup and I didn't have a lot of money and now we're actually quite big. Yeah. What's typically the route you would take them down if they were to start speaking to you and your colleagues, I guess? Yeah, and
generally we'd be trying to demystify a lot of this stuff because I think a lot of this is more relatable in real life than people often expect. People often think they've got to have a level of sophistication or a level of budget before they think about these things, but actually you can quite quickly see real world impact. So we'd usually start by looking at where can we add the value? Where is the intellectual property in this business? Again, not so much from an enforcement point of view, but creating value in whatever that looks like. And you mentioned patents. Patents are really valuable, but they're just one of the tools that we have as IP lawyers. They're probably the tool that's spoken about the most, and most people famous. Use that. Yeah, exactly. And they'll be right for some businesses, but they won't be right for others. And whilst patents are really powerful, they're also quite expensive to acquire.
Yeah, they're very expensive. I can vouch for that.
Okay, some war stories there. But there are other rights like copyright, which are free, and just really about auditing what's there, assessing what's there, putting in place that strategy. So we'd normally start by looking at what they've got already and perhaps they don't know about. How do we make the most out of that? And then are there other avenues we can go down? And some of these things are... again, not massively expensive. So a trademark registration, government fees, and the government fees are going to change soon for the first time in a long time. But if you file an application...
They're getting cheaper, are they?
Never gets cheaper, does it?
No.
So they're going up slightly, but it's the first time in a long time since they've gone up, to be fair. But so there's a whole classification system, which I won't bore people with, but there are 45 different classes from a trademark point of view, and they all do different things. More classes you go in, the more it tends to cost. And if you go in one class, government fee is £170. So that gets you, provided it goes through the process without any issues, that gets you your trademark registration in one class, that gets you your monopoly, that gets you that title deed to that brand. You can
say, I've got trademarked. Because with that, I mean, we've done some trademarking and the classifications, you can have a trademark in a classification that's very similar to someone else in another classification, but if you're not selling the same goods or services, then they tend to get approved.
Can do.
typically, unless someone's really doing a good job of like vetting or monitoring the submissions, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's this whole thing around whether marks are confusing or not. And once you start sort of working with trademarks and brands in the way that we do every day, it's a side to the world that you can never sort of unsee. It's always there. So when you're looking at products in supermarkets or you're seeing lorries drive by and all that sort of stuff, it's always on the radar.
Because Lidl must be getting very close, and Aldi, to a lot of these. I mean, walking around their shops, it's so fascinating how they've managed to get so close to a brand name where they're not the brand. There's still enough distinction, but you know exactly who they're trying to be.
Yeah, but that's also their strength, because you know what that product is going to be like before you know what brand they're trying to emulate or copy. So you know what to expect from the product, and it's probably quite often it's right next to it as well.
Yeah.
And then you're paying half the price for it. So yeah, I mean, is that ethical, or does that add value to consumers that are buying that product because they're getting something?
I think the consumer probably gets value, but the brands that they're doing it to probably quite a nightmare, really. I don't know if you know of any like cases that have arisen from that, or
I mean there's a number, and I'm sure the supermarkets would say that they're not infringing and they're not getting close to and so on. I think there are certain products have a design language, so there's certain things that you expect to see as a consumer that educate you perhaps what category of product it is that you're looking at. And there's a whole wealth of cases around whether or not marks and things are similar or not. So whether products are complementary to each other, whether they're alternatives to each other. So to your point about the classes, for example, the famous example that's always rolled out is Polo, where you've got Polo mints, you've got Polo cars, and you've got Polo lifestyle, Ralph Lauren's, all sorts of different things. And there's no risk of confusion because you're not going to buy Polos instead of a car and vice versa.
Polo shirt,
but
a Polo mint shirt.
Exactly. But there's a whole sort of, that's those things are quite far apart. But as you get closer together, it becomes more contentious to whether they're similar or not. So you might have two food products, for example, which on the face of it are different, but part of the dialogue might be, well, actually, they're different products, but they're interchangeable. So somebody going in to buy lunch might have product A in mind, but product B will do if A is not on the shelf. So different categories. So when you get your registration, you get this monopoly, and it's designed to enable you to stop people from doing similar marks, identical marks, similar goods, services, or identical ones. And it's all at its heart, which again is something that often gets forgotten. It's all at its heart about protecting the consumer. So it builds value for the brands, but it also protects consumers. And if you think back to when trademarks and branding, going way back into sort of in history, and I think this also has an impact on the way brands are evolving. But when you think about the history of brands, you were looking at perhaps a brand on a head of cattle, and it wasn't about shouting or saying "buy me" instead of the other one. It was about giving you reassurance that.
Is that how you think it would have started? Is that the theory?
I think that's one of the ways it evolved. Yeah, as this badge of trust, reassurance. You might have known the rancher that raised the cattle. You were making a decision based on those.
So what we're saying
factors.
is first brands were cattle.
I don't know about first, but I think that has been this part of the evolution, and it's certainly carried through in the law, because part of what you're doing with a trademark is protecting the consumer, so that if I buy something with that brand on it, doesn't matter if I'm in any city in the country, I've got reassurance that whatever's in that packet is going to be the same thing. And so part of the obligation that brand owners have is to maintain consistency across those products.
Yeah. So in terms of kind of litigation, I mean, where there's brands, obviously when you register a trademark, there is some fees that you can opt for, or services you can opt for to have that monitored. How does that look? Is that done like a search is done, regularly? Is that something you guys offer where you kind of go, well, now you've got your branding, we need to make sure that someone doesn't jump into the same category as you with that trademark or something similar that's confusing? Because ultimately, if they're not looking, they're not policing, which means potentially some branding could get passed through. Yep. That's correct, right, in what I'm saying?
Yeah, I mean, the UK IPO which is the government body that looks after these things, does do monitoring. So once you have a mark on the register, they will notify you if somebody else files something which they think is the same.
So they actually do some monitoring at the intellectual.
So there is some
office.
monitoring, yes, but the onus is still then on the brand owner to make a decision as to whether they want to do anything. And one of the things I think that we often see with trademarks is that it's not necessarily about shutting somebody else down, but it's about having the tools to go and have a dialogue. So you might be quite happy if somebody else uses a similar brand or the same brand in a complementary product line.
Sure.
But it would be part of a commercial arrangement. Maybe there's something that works for both or all the parties involved.
Like a Parliament shirt.
And some sort of license. Yeah.
You've obsessed with this polo
Well,
shirt.
get it great.
It's going to be in the shops soon.
You're going to make one, are you? Is that your next thing? It's going to be an Etsy special or something.
Yeah.
Another business to open.
Yeah. No, I'm all right for that. So, I mean, in terms of your situations where you have someone who's got, say I have a trademark, someone opens a business doing the same as me, they have a similar trademark, and a discussion starts where they feel that we're infringing or vice versa. What's the steps taken then? Does it go on like, does it enter into like more of a mediation discussion to start with, or how does that kind of progress?
With a few exceptions, so sometimes there are other factors, might be safety issues around certain products or counterfeit goods and those sorts of things. But generally there's a dialogue of some sort. So setting out what your rights are, why there's an issue with what the other side have done. And then very, very often it's about drawing people to the table. And one of the things where IP does differ from tangible assets, I was saying earlier about how there's sort of very much a similarity between tangible and intangible. And that's pretty much anything you can do with an intangible asset. You can do, with a tangible asset, you can do with an intangible asset in terms of selling it, leasing it, licensing it, giving it away and all those sorts of things. But with a tangible asset, often, like a building, there's only one person that can be in it at a time. Yeah. But with the intangible assets, you've got all sorts of opportunities. So you might be quite happy for somebody else to use it or occupy a certain space or a certain
brand deal,
channel.
like leasing, brand licensing deals,
exactly.
which happens quite a lot actually.
Yeah.
I think like the electronics goods market, you've got things like Russell Hobbs and brands like that, and they're not actually making any of those products. There'll be a factory, typically in China, where I could go to them and say, I want to bring out a waffle maker, and I want to have your branding, and they'll give you if they're not a licensing agreement already with someone else in place, potentially licensing rights to use their brand name. So they'd probably make more money doing that than they would if they were to try and produce products sometimes.
It can be licensing deals on brand, there can be licensing deals on
patents.
Patents, designs, the layout of sort of circuit boards and everything else. You can get down into all sorts of different levels of detail.
Website themes and stuff like that as well, which we deal with. We buy a theme off WordPress or Shopify or whatever.
You try not to do WordPress.
Other options are available. And you pay for that usage, but you don't own that.
Yeah, software licensing is quite a big thing now, isn't it? People create software and then license it for a fee.
Yep.
And we're quite used to paying those fees. That's typically how it's sold, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
You get a personal license to use that software. So software is a bit different in that respect. You kind of don't really always own the license necessarily, own the software fully.
Yeah.
You've licensed it. It's either a monthly recurring or a yearly, or you might get a perpetual license. But typically there's the word license is included in that, even like, down to, I think obviously businesses will need a different license to a personal person wanting a license. So, so I guess that's where you're talking about that value proposition again of like, okay, why would you make the effort to create IP and document that and have a legal standing on it, is to use it as a vehicle to create value is what you see more than an invitation to a court date later down the line. Which I think some people go, there's a bit of both that happens, but mostly it's to create value.
Absolutely. And I think that perception that it's about enforcement puts a lot of SMEs off because they think they're never going to be able to afford the enforcement costs. So why bother? But exactly as you described there, they're looking at it from the other angle, looking at it through a different lens. It's creating those opportunities for value for revenue generation going forward. And the software licensing is a classic example. Not only in how making sure that you own those assets gives you something which you can then commercialize, but also interesting on the disconnect. I think people are much more likely to take advantage of a copyright license or not understand the restrictions of a copyright license than they are with, for example, a lease on a building or something. So,
Right, okay, yeah.
So you can set the same sort of principles, but for a lot of businesses, they treat those different things.
So talk to us a little bit about copyright, because you've
Sure.
mentioned that a few times, and I'm
Yeah.
not fully au fait with copyright as
Okay.
probably I should be. So, how does that get implemented at a sort of standard business level? Like, what would be the process of doing that?
Yeah, okay. Is it useful just to do a quick run through of the main IP rights?
Yeah, go for it. Go for that.
So branding and trademarks we've spoken about already. They protect reputation and logos and company names and how you present yourself in the market. You have designs that protect the way things look. So not really interested in anything other than the appearance.
Yes.
And that could be bits of a product. It could be the whole product. It could be all sorts of different things. Then you've got patents, which we spoke about earlier, which protect the way things work. So traditionally that's inventions, but it can also be certain software and other things as well. And then you've got copyright. And copyright is everywhere. Every business has got copyright. And the good news is you don't need to register it. But what you do need to do is make sure you know what you've got and you look at it and you audit it and all the rest of it. And almost it's a blessing and a curse, that sort of automatic nature of it. And the fact that it's everywhere means that people take it for granted and they don't necessarily then do the stuff to look at the value. So copyright is a right which enables the owner to control copying. And it applies to, the clunky phrase is an expression of an idea. So it doesn't protect ideas, but it protects the way those ideas are expressed. So you could, for example, have lots of different word processors. The idea of a word processor is not protected, but the software code and the layout of the site and so on, and indeed then the content that the user creates when they type stuff into the word processor is going to be copyright protected. So copyright will apply to code, to images, to the written word, to photographs, to videos, to sound files. It's everywhere.
Right. Okay.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
actually, quite a muddy field to navigate, really. Then, if you're trying to protect that, it's probably harder than like going for a trademark and having the trademark and saying, "Well, that's done."
Yeah.
Tick.
Yeah.
Copyright is an admin. Some rules and some kind of processes within a business and keep that maintained.
Yeah, absolutely. And crosses over with other things. So businesses will have databases that have value, and some businesses will undervalue the information they've got. So they might have data sets about supply chain and all of those sorts of things, which might have taken years to amass and has a real value, but they just take it for granted.
Yeah.
And that might be, for example, a database right, which is a whole different podcast, but that's closely related right to copyright.
People selling of data is quite common now, isn't it? I think there's some real crazy numbers, especially like to the NHS. I think there was a lot of stuff around, or the NHS looking to sell information as well.
Okay.
Well, there's also privacy that comes into that as well, doesn't it? Because like this podcast, we've got you here, we've got you attending, and we're chatting with you.
Yeah.
Am I right? And we've got your permission to publish this, but at the end of the day, it's owned by us as an organisation. Is that kind of right?
Yeah. So there'll be loads of different copyrights. So in things like a podcast, there might be copyrights.
We should probably get waivers signed.
Yeah.
I don't think we want to put one to
Get it on
lawyer,
film.
because that might. I don't think Becca's GPT will write the right one for that. It might get scrutinised. But loosely, it's an agreement that we have agreed to sit here and chat. But I guess. But yeah, the information within this could be valuable, right?
Yeah.
As well, right? So and then people can gatekeep that and have and not have, like, so for example, training courses.
Yep.
You film a training course, you would have copyright over that, right? Is that kind of how it would work, or am I going up the wrong?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, people think about copyright as an asset in software businesses, but consultancy businesses, training businesses, there's all sorts of walks of life where copyright is going to be the main IP right, and there'll be multiple layers. So in something like a training provider, they'll have brand, and that'll be one of the key things that gets customers to their door. Because they'll see that brand, they'll know the reputation. But also then there'll be copyright in the training materials. If somebody's recorded it, there might be a separate copyright in that recording. And where you're right that it, that back to a blessing and a curse thing, that it's automatic, so you don't need to register it. But at least with something you need to register, you know what you've done and you've got it and it's finite and it's mapped out.
Do you have to put sort of copyright protected on? Because I see that quite a lot on various things. Is that would you advise for anyone who's doing any of that to put some form of statement or declaration on it to say this is copyright protected? Was that a given, or is that needed, I guess, to enforce? How does it work?
It's a really, really good point, and important not to overlook. So you don't have to do anything, but you can put the little C in a circle. That's the common way of doing it. And then you tend to put the date that the work was created, and then hyphen and new one.
It.
Yeah, so that goes back to that bit about auditing and being able to show what you've got and how you got there and that you created it and so on.
Because I heard a thing years ago that people said, this is probably wrong. It's probably an urban myth. But if you wrote something down on a piece of paper and then you had it posted by and stamp dated, that would be a way of documenting a date. This probably predates us having a digital age where you can have a footprint But was that a way that people commonly sort of protected things, or is that a thing that was completely made up of?
No, people used to do that a lot. Not really sure that it had a huge amount of value. But what they were trying to do was then prove that at least it existed as of a certain date.
Yes.
So you tend to, with copyright, you tend to have issues around being able to show authorship. So can you show your workings out to how you got to the finished product? Can you demonstrate that? Date of creation is another thing. And then there's a couple of other quirks. So a common one that trips people up is around who did the work. So if you're using a third-party consultant, as a general rule, they'll own the copyright that you create. So they'll own the copyright that they create. So you go to them and you say, can you create me a website? And they say, yes, of course we can. They create the website. Chances are they'll own the copyright in it. Goes back to your earlier point about agencies in terms of conditions.
Been some big cases around that. Particularly.
And people just take it for granted. They don't necessarily understand how it works. But going back to one of your earlier questions about dealing with those SMEs, an early stage would be, where have we used third parties and where does the IP sit? And is there anything we need to do to try and bring some of that back in-house?
Would you get them to sign a declaration, a document when you're working with, would that be an advisement that you'd have where you would ask those questions? So we're advising the SME to be wary of this and to ask those questions and to send something over that basically just stipulates that they can't, they own the rights to the copy, I guess. Having something in writing is crucial, but it doesn't need to be complicated. No, I think we have a very small piece within our agreement that it says. To be effective, that needs to be in writing. But there's loads of other curveballs, particularly going back to your bit about software and modern tech. So you have this whole stuff around open source software, which again is a whole different podcast, but open source software has terms and conditions attached to it. Even though it's financially free, it still has terms and conditions, and lots of organizations don't understand that, so they don't look at that. And then increase. So that would be building something on that platform and then monetizing it. Potentially could be a breach of the terms and conditions of the open source. Potentially. So other people have made that. So going back to basics, that copyright is a right that enables somebody to control copying. Somebody that's coded something and made it available to the world under an open source license still has copyright in it. It's just that they've said, I'm going to make it available for people to use under the terms of an open source license. And the open source license that they choose will have an impact on what you can do with it. Some of them basically say, do what you like. Others are much more restrictive and don't like commercial use and those sorts of things. Yeah, the commercial use thing is a problem with open source sometimes. So you might program and develop something that you are encompassing with a product that you're selling or whatever, and then they buy it and actually you've then sold it. And then there could be some, I guess, backlash from that if someone was to pick it up and go, well, actually, we prohibit that happening. 100%. Yeah. Yeah, 100%. So I'm just sitting here now and I'm thinking, God, look at all the areas that I'm not touching within my businesses. what's the process? I mean, I'm assuming some form of auditing of said company to say, okay, talk me through your company, what you do, what the areas are, and then maybe some like structuring of that company to be more mindful of these things and having an IP database, I guess, or like, you know, some sort of filing of all of that would be
some sort of asset register.
Yes,
something like that would be sensible. I think we're really keen that people engage again through that value creation bit with this sort of prevention is better than cure, as in so many walks of life. And
it is.
Often for small businesses, they come unstuck somehow, and it might be that somebody else uses their brand or registers their brand, or, you know, falls out with them on a copyright issue or whatever. And so you help them with that, and then you rebuild. But how much better it would be just to be able to build those assets in the first place.
Right at the start.
Yeah, absolutely. And think about, so exactly as you say, an audit process, but thinking about what really adds value to the business. So an place like this, we're in this great studio, you could move building tomorrow and the business would continue. But there are things which are consistent and which stay part of your organisation forever. And most of those things are intangible.
Correct.
And that's where the long-term value
Yeah, I didn't think of it like that.
That if you think about it in that way, which is easy for me to say because I know that business owners have got 101 other things to draw on their demand. But if you think about that long term, where does the value sit? How do we build something sustainable? Then IP usually plays a part in that.
Okay, so and talk to me a little bit about where you are now and where you work. Is it for you to kind of, what's your involvement with businesses? Like, how do you sort of, what's your role effectively within the organisation? Where do you get involved?
So I head up the intellectual property team, which is spread across. We've got offices across the UK, and we're a sort of multi-site team. And we help businesses, as I say, with all sorts of different aspects. So partly that'll be this audit process, and potentially follow-up work. So doing trademark filings and the like. We'll get involved in supporting them with contracts. So that will often be thinking about all of the interactions where data is going into an organisation or intellectual property is going into an organisation, and all of the interactions where it's going out again. So databases coming in, products going out and everything else. We will think about what's going on in the middle. So that as part of the production process, are there things that we can do to make sure that either we're not stepping on other people's toes from an IP point of view, or that our production process is being IP friendly and generating IP that, again, we can look at value in. And of course, if worse comes to the worst, then we have litigators on the team that will do that piece of
but that's not what
dealing with
that's not
infringement.
what your main fundamental aim is to be doing, is to fight IP. It's just to put it in place and make sure it's adding value, because there'll be stuff that people can do. And I mean, we've had instances where we could go and create register more IP, I go for a patent globally, or do this or do that, and then you kind of got to go, well, is it worth? What's the return on that? You know, because there'll be a payoff to whether it's valuable or not valuable. You might have the IP still, but it might not be a valuable piece of IP. Just because you've come up with an idea doesn't mean it's worth anything, I guess, is the statement.
The difficulty is also because when you create something, you don't know if that thing's going to have any value until it actually has value. And then it's not quite too late, but you kind of need to think about it before
that's
it has any value.
Yeah, it is a good point. And I think that's an area where, for example, patents can be cumbersome for a smaller business because they're expensive. And
there's always more costs. That's what I found. You register one and then it takes forever. And then they go, well, if you want it now to be valid in Europe, you need to pay all this money. And if you want it to be valid in America, it's another load of money. So it can get quite costly, and you have to weigh up, okay, it was, a technical patent for a particular function. It's like, is someone going to come after us? Are we going to license that? Is one thing, or not? If you're not going to license it, there is a benefit from a valuation point of view as well. Businesses get valued higher with patents.
Yeah, that can be. Yeah,
potentially. Not always. What is it? There's not always that important sometimes with valuations. Do you know what I mean? It's true.
Yeah. Sometimes businesses are asked how many patents they've got rather than sort of the quality of the portfolio. I mean, there will be times and there will be businesses for whom patents are right all day long and it's the right thing to do. But I think it needs to have that process that goes into it before making those applications. Is it the right thing? Why are we doing it? And when you look at things like AI and you look at software and things like that, there's always a question then as well around the commercial value of obtaining a monopoly in the way you've done what you've done, compared to the payoff of telling the world how you did what you did. So
a
lot of stuff, particularly with modern innovation, people can enjoy the benefits of it, whether it's a streaming service or whatever it is, without knowing what the code is behind the scenes.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
Having that dialogue, I think, before going off and doing all the patent filings is what I would advocate. Not saying patents aren't for us. Let's ignore them completely, but let's do it with our eyes open.
It's probably a real key area of what you do, but it's just interesting having gone through the process. Like trademarks, again, as well, was an interesting, it's an eye-opener for having similarities in trademarks in the same category and then understanding how to navigate those waters. And we've had a bit of that. And typically we go, well, will you be comfortable with us just changing this slightly or like our name slightly? Or, you know, I mean, our logo is popped up in lots of places in a different form or another for different businesses. It must just be something that's around that you can kind of grab and use. And so you have to be careful where do you want to get into a battle. But if it was like an Evolution Media right here in this park right now, would we be, an Evolution actually is like really common name for service businesses.
And media.
And media's, so you kind of open up a whole world of problems sometimes, but just having it there and documented and being in a position so you can protect, I guess, is good. But also someone, if they were to come and value the business, would go, well, is your name protected? Do you have any, is it trademarks? Because that's going to be what draws the customers to you and continues that reputation.
100%. And what you're describing there, where you have that dialogue around what if we change this or what if we do this, then that can be quite painful.
People are quite precious.
And there's an emotional attachment to a brand that isn't necessarily the same with other assets. And I get that people have invested, like I said earlier, blood, sweat and tears into building this thing and building their reputation. But and how much better, again, to have that conversation 3 months into the business rather than 3 years, 6 years into the business, and then suddenly find that you're in a position where you're having to go backwards.
You've got to rebrand completely and then go again. And people obviously question why you've done that sometimes, because it could be a bad business that's gone sour and that you're rebranding because of that. There's a lot of that happens.
So I know of an agency, this is quite a few years ago now, they had the word Apple in their name and they got a cease and desist from Apple. Yeah. But they're nothing to do. I think
Apple's done this to a lot of people.
It's weird.
Or Banana and things like that. They're even like going after...
You might just ignore it, wouldn't you? Or contest it, I suppose, because it's totally unrelated to the service itself.
Yeah. Well, at the risk of sounding like a lawyer, I can't comment on those cases.
You don't want to get into talking about Apple, obviously.
But there are brands which are sort of super brands, where they have such a big reputation that people are going to make an assumption that there's a connection. So there are those brands where they're so well known that even if they're not known for making ice cream or whatever it is, if somebody saw that brand on a tub of ice cream, it's going to call to mind the other one. They're going to think of it.
Yeah, of course.
And so there are, and it's a limited group of brands, but there are some brands that are so well known that their protection,
and I guess
through that reputation expense,
it protects the end user as well, as you were saying before, like the customer effectively, because they're not going to. They don't want to be dealing with someone potentially on false premise that they're linked in any way or whatever.
Absolutely, and the flip side is also true. You sometimes see that a brand or a theme is really popular, and you go back to basics. Well, why have you suddenly picked that as an organisation? You know that's riding on the goodwill that's been created by somebody else.
It's fantastic. It's fascinating. It's a really interesting area, because I think where. Just sitting here now, it's like I was just thinking about our logo when we originally set up the business, and we went through some sort of online business to get a logo generated for us. And even then they issued a copyright certificate with a date on it. And I was trying to think of a time where I've seen that done, and then I've kind of cast my mind back. But that, I mean, probably a lot of people would have a logo created by a family member or a friend. Maybe there isn't necessarily like, actually, you know, this is the date and time that it happened, and I'm happy for you to have it. This is the gifting of the copyright of it, because, and I think that's where people maybe, like you say, really early humble beginnings don't have that knowledge. And then later on down the line, actually, it could be quite costly, or even completely damage their business because they haven't taken those steps. So it's I guess a probably non-sexy subject, because everyone doesn't want to think about IP and you know, kind of the legal ramifications, but a subject that's so important, I think, for a lot of businesses. And I think obviously will continue to be very important, especially in the age we're in, where there's more businesses popping up all the time. You know, people can have create brands quicker and easier now with the online media age that we're in. Yeah. And even, I guess, in podcasting, you know, we've not looked too hard on whether behind the brands is taken by somebody. Don't come after us if it is. We are happy to change it slightly if needed. But it's I guess it's better to protect rather than to ask for forgiveness later. Yeah. And all businesses, as you say, they might not be thinking about it, but whether they want to think about it or not, all businesses are going to be interacting with IP, and all businesses are going to be generating IP. So it's whether they want to take advantage of that. So how do we get hold of you? If someone's really interested today in learning more and they want to get in touch and have a conversation, what does that look like? Where do they go? We can obviously add some details to
please do. LinkedIn's good. Foot Anstey website is good. So
And you're this area particularly, or you're Southwest? What's the remit?
All over the place. So we've got offices up to Bristol, up to Manchester, across to London. So everywhere. We have a lot of overseas clients that we look after as well. So we're really not restricted by geography, but the Southwest is home. Good. Well, thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it. Everyone give him a clap. Thanks very much. Thank you. What a pleasure. Cheers. Great.